All right. Yeah. Okay. There we go. All right. Good evening. I am not Tim Stutzman. I am not David of the Bible, but I am David of Bay Area, I guess. I was trying to think. We don't have any other Davids, do we? That's unusual. Anyway, welcome to our Wednesday night class, either here or if you're joining us online. This is our first week of a study of the book of Exodus. There's the whole good news, bad news kind of scenario of stuff, and usually it's, I got good news, bad news, and they tell you something, and then they tell you the other thing. Well, I got good news and bad news, but it's both the same thing depending on your perspective. For those of you who have commented on how long that we were in the book of Luke, Luke has 24 chapters. Exodus has 40. We may, as Martha was saying, we may wander in the wilderness for 40 years before we get done. But probably not, because that would make me 112. So if we do that. So we probably won't do that. Tonight, as usual, in the first episodes of one of my classes, we probably won't get to the text because we're going to talk about some other stuff. And we're going to do this for a week, and then we're going to take a break next week. Next week is the Death by Chocolate event here at the building. So if you're watching us online and you tune in next week, you won't see a class. So fair warning there. But we're going to dive into the book. There's some background information and some discussion that I hope will be helpful for us to kind of put this book into context. Kudos to Tim for the class that he taught on David. That was a great class. I really enjoyed that. And kudos to him a couple of weeks ago, the sermon that he did with the healing of the Gentile woman and putting that in context with the feeding of the 5,000, the feeding of the 4,000. If you didn't get to listen to that sermon, you need to go find it. It is really good and kind of an eye-opener for me and really helpful to understand what was going on in that event. So hopefully the things we're going to talk about tonight will put us in position to get the most that we can out of Exodus. I have a PowerPoint tonight. I do not promise to have a PowerPoint every week. They're a lot of work, frankly. And again, Tim's PowerPoints were really good. I look forward to them and kind of imitated him a little bit maybe here. Also, if you've been in Daryl Berry's class, his PowerPoints on Sunday are very, very good. I'm impressed. So I got a little something here tonight. Got a startup thing for us, but it's not really a startup thing. And in a lot of ways, this is kind of the heart of what I want us to talk about tonight as we sort of get our perspective and our framing of the book of Exodus and how it fits in with things. And that's the idea of what are the top 10 major events in the Old Testament. This is really interesting because I got this idea, and so I Googled it. I don't do AI, okay? Anything that's up there, you can blame it on me. But the interesting thing when I Googled it is I found lots of lists of top events in the Old Testament. But nobody wanted to condense, except for one, nobody wanted to condense it to 10. You can find all kinds of lists of 25 big events in the Old Testament. Okay? There's multiples of those, because it's hard. It's hard to figure out, well, which are the 10. And this is kind of interesting. I don't know that I agree with every one of them, and some of them were a little bit of a surprise to me that they thought that they were in the top 10, but the more I've thought about it, the more it makes sense, and the more I think this list fits in with where we're going. So I'm just, before I reveal the list, in your mind, what are the big events of the Old Testament? parting of the Red Sea, okay? If you come into this class and you don't think of that, you got your mind somewhere else tonight. Jim?
The creation.
The creation, okay. Mike? Adam and Eve leaving the garden. The flood. Ten Commandments. Okay, yeah, we're in the Old Testament. Okay. David and Goliath is not on the list. Okay. That's the first one that's not on the list. Preacher. No. Jim.
What about the Babylonian captivity?
Okay, Babylonian captivity. Okay. That's not one that usually jumps to our minds, but we're gonna see that one on the list.
How about Sarah having children?
Sarah having children. The plagues. Jonah and the big fish. Okay. All right, the story of Joseph. It's interesting that you guys have been on all sides of Abraham and nobody's mentioned him yet. Jeannie? Okay, the birth of Moses. There are lots of events. Elijah on Mount Carmel. I mean, Abraham sacrificing Isaac. Okay, there's lots of stuff in that book. Well, here are the 10. And these are in chronological order, not ranked order for kind of obvious reasons.
Who's the reference on that?
I don't know. I didn't look it up. Yeah, it's some Bible site. I mean, there are all kinds of lists out there.
Okay.
Just about every religious group that posts stuff on the internet has some kind of list like this, and I don't remember whose this was. But they got it to 10, and it sort of consolidated with and fit with what we're studying. Obviously, if there's not a creation, there's no rest of the list. Okay, there's the creation of the world, and of course of man. There's the fall of humanity. So some of these kind of combine things: the creation of man, creation of woman, living in the garden, the sin and the fall, and so second one is the fall of humanity. Third one is the Great Flood. Okay. Obviously, a world-changing event. God essentially starting over in a lot of ways. This one was not on my list and nobody mentioned, but when you think about it for a little while, I think it belongs on this list, and that's the Tower of Babel. What was the significance of the Tower of Babel? Why would it be on the list? Yes? Okay, we speak different languages. And what happened as a result of people speaking different languages? They spread out. That's spread people all across the world. Okay, so it was a world-impacting event. Next, we've got the call of Abraham and all that followed from God choosing Abraham, not because of his righteousness, but because he chose him and said that I am going to bless the world through your descendants. Okay, we are here today because of the call of Abraham. And wrapped up in that is Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and all of that stuff, down to the Exodus from Egypt. Everything from the call of Abraham down to they leave Egypt is all about Abraham's family and their immediate descendants and how they got from where they were down to being enslaved in Egypt. 7, giving the law at Sinai. This was probably not one that was on your list. The 10 Commandments, okay? But in a minute when we talk about the outline of the book of Exodus, you probably think that we're going to talk about 40 years of wandering in the desert. But 40 years of wandering in the desert is not in Exodus, okay? It's on in Numbers afterwards. We're really headed out of Egypt to Mount Sinai for the giving of the law and the making of the covenant with the people of Israel. Big event. The law of Moses and everything that followed with Israel as a nation flowed through that. Got the conquest of Canaan. Okay, the wandering in the desert, the getting in, Jericho. Nobody mentioned Jericho. All of the battles and the judges and the rise of the prophets, rise of Samuel and the prophets that followed. And then these last few, you see, we're combining more and more events to get to, what are some of these stories about? You got the rise of the monarchy. Okay, Israel saying we want a king, and Saul and David that we talked about, and Solomon, and all the kings that followed it. Israel transitioning from judges and prophets to earthly kings. Then last, number 10, the Babylonian exile and return. You could combine into either the rise of the monarchy or the Babylonian exile, the Assyrian exile, when they were carried off into captivity, and the separation from 10 tribes down to 2, and the scattering of the 10, all of that stuff. But the important thing was, after the Babylonian exile, they didn't get exiled anymore. They came back. They rebuilt the temple and set the stage for about 500 years later for Jesus, John the Baptist, and then Jesus. Those are the big events. And what we're going to be talking about in Exodus has been described by more than one author as this is the pivot point of the Old Testament. Everything that leads up to the Exodus is all about God creating, God recreating, dealing with Abraham and his family. In Exodus, we have him taking Abraham's descendants as a people and fulfilling his promise to Abraham that he's going to make them into a great nation. And we're going to talk about maybe later on tonight where these folks are starting from. And I think sometimes maybe we blow past that a little bit quickly and don't think about what a monumental task it was to take a people who had never been a people, who had only been slaves, and turn them into a nation. And then, of course, get through to giving the law. The stuff at Mount Sinai is really, really interesting, and we don't often study it. And when we get to the book of Hebrews and we get to chapter 12, the end of chapter, I think it's the end of chapter 11, where he talks about you've not come to a smoke and a mountain. It's all about this covenant at Mount Sinai. And it really is, I think, it is the climax of the book of Hebrews. And we never talk about it because we're not Jewish by birth and we don't identify with some of the things that are talked about in there. But it's a really, really powerful scripture and a really, really powerful study that I hope will, when we get to it, will be helpful in not only understanding Exodus, but also that you'll go back and reread the end of the book of Hebrews. All right, here's the outline. First 15 chapters are really all about Israel in Egypt. Call of Moses, birth of Moses, the call of Moses, all of the things that happened, all of the oppression, all of the things that seemingly were going wrong and that God had forgotten them. Okay? Leading up to God saying, I haven't forgotten you, and putting into place their liberation. The next 3 chapters are about them journeying from the Red Sea to Mount Sinai. Okay? Usually we get there and we start talking about the 40 years wandering in the wilderness. Again, it doesn't happen here. They're on a short trip. I think it's only about 3 months from leaving Egypt to get down to Mount Sinai. Then chapters 19 through 24 are about the covenant that God makes with the people of Israel. And then the last 15 chapters are all about constructing the tabernacle. I don't intend on reading every verse of the book of Exodus like we did the book of Luke. And in fact, when we get to chapters 25 through 40, in particular, some of that stuff about constructing the tabernacle seems kind of tedious, and we may move through a lot of that fairly quickly. Like we did with Luke, I'm using my Monday night Zoom group as the guinea pigs on this, and we're up through about I think we did chapter 16 on Monday night. So I haven't gotten there yet, so I don't know how it's going to teach. So we will see what happens. I think we can do about a chapter a week. We've been able to do that on Monday nights. All right, talk a little bit about the background of the book. Who's the author? Moses. Okay, how we know? Doesn't say this is the book of Exodus as written by Moses. How we know? Matt.
Well, at some point in there, God told Moses to write these things down.
Okay.
Doesn't Jesus refer to him as?
Okay. And I think in more than one place, but in one place in the Gospel of Mark, specifically, when Jesus is sparring with either the Pharisees or the Sadducees or all of them, he said, Moses wrote, and he quotes from Exodus. Okay? Other than the folks that really don't want to admit anything about the Bible as being beneficial or true or whatever, they're the only ones who pick at who the author is. Everybody else pretty much understands, this is Moses. There are clearly a few verses in there that obviously were put in after his death because they talk about things that post-dated his death. But by and large, we're reading the Torah, part of the Torah that Jews and Christians alike recognize that Moses was the author. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, start looking up and studying about, when did the Exodus occur? There's all kinds of stuff in there. People guessing and trying to figure out when it happened, and in particular, lots of times trying to figure out which Pharaoh it was. Okay? And you will find folks just virtually betting their life that, it was Ramesses II, okay, or no, it was Akhenaten, or two or three others, and given reasons why it had to be that way. Why don't we know? Why don't we know which Pharaoh it is? I mean, an event like this seems like there would just... Well, hang on to that thought. What you got, Randy?
This was written by Moses for the children of Israel. They knew which Pharaoh it was.
Okay. That's a good point. All right, Irene?
I think that God allows to the Bible what he wants us to know.
Okay.
And if he doesn't want us to know, or it's not important to him, then it doesn't get in there.
Okay. I think that's a valid point. Yeah, Matt?
I think there's a lack of archaeological mentions of Moses or the Pharaoh.
Why?
Maybe,
we're talking maybe 2 million people. Okay, leaving. We're talking about countrywide plagues and killing a firstborn and going up to Canaan and taking over Canaan and reworking that whole area. Why? That must mean it's not true, that it's made up, right?
Was it really relevant to what God wanted for his people?
Okay. Wasn't relevant for his people. Why don't we see all these hieroglyphics by the Egyptians about stuff?
But this is just mere conjecture on my part, but it was an embarrassment to them.
Okay.
They would not have man typically does not write about the embarrassments,
Okay.
which is why the Bible is inspired by God.
Okay. How many French monuments do you suppose there are to Waterloo? Okay. How many arches have been erected or were erected by the Romans for defeats that they had? Losers don't want to talk about it. Okay. And there are a few obscure things that folks have found that they don't understand and could potentially be put in the context of the Exodus. But the Egyptians don't want to talk about it. By the time the Israelites leave, not only has their country been ravaged and put into ruins, and they probably lost family members, their country has been ransacked and pillaged by the Israelites. They walk off with the wealth of Egypt, not because they strong-armed it away from them, but because the Egyptians wanted them to go so badly. They said, here, I'll give you this stuff if you'll just go. Okay? So there's really no reason in a lot of places to find extra-biblical evidence or mentions of stuff like that. I think there's another reason why we don't know Pharaoh's name. And that is that the concept of a name in the Bible is very important. When Jacob wrestled with whoever he wrestled with and he got him in a hold, what did Jacob want to know? Okay, he could ask for a lot of stuff. Go away, leave me alone. Okay, bless me with this. He says, I want to know your name. Okay. When Moses goes to the burning bush in chapter 3, what does he want? And God tells him to go talk to Pharaoh. What does Moses ask him? Who do I say sent me? Okay, the idea of having a name, one, to the person who knows the name, it gives them a power, a measure of power over the person. Because I know if I know your name, and when we go to a party, we say, what's your name and what do you do? It's like I can categorize you at that point. I can sort of put you in a place. Okay? A name also brings significance and weight. Pharaoh is not important. The book of Exodus is about the total defeat and complete repudiation of the power and the claims of Pharaoh. He's a nobody. It doesn't matter which Pharaoh it is. He's a nobody compared to the power of Jehovah. And I think that's one reason we don't read about it. We're going to see even in chapter 1 this concept about who it is that has names in the first chapter of Exodus is kind of interesting after having this discussion about us not knowing the name of Pharaoh. Okay. There are, I think, 7 sort of themes and applications for the book of Exodus that will come up again and again in our study. These aren't original. They actually come from a Jewish theologian. Chet Duke probably knows him. Fairly well-known guy. I've reworded a couple of them because I think they're more applicable to what we're studying. But I want to run through and talk about those. And one is that Exodus affirms that God's sovereignty over nature is absolute. Okay. When we get into the plagues and what God does with various parts of nature up to and including the parting of the sea, God is sovereign over nature, unlike the pagan gods, which are a part of nature, okay, and maybe had some sway over some parts of nature, supposedly. But God is above that, and God is presented here completely different. And Pharaoh never gets the point. Okay, over and over again in the plagues, it's going to be showing the power and the sovereignty of God. And Pharaoh just doesn't want to admit it. Second, along that same lines, is that humans cannot thwart the purposes of God. Pharaoh is a god to his people. Okay, he is the embodiment of a God. Pharaoh, that was the role that Pharaohs played. He was looked on as a deity. Could not thwart. You know, for a while his magicians could do some magic tricks that sort of looked like the stuff that God was doing, but after a while they threw up their hands and said, we can't do this stuff. In fact, at one point they go and encourage Pharaoh, we can't do it. God's helping this guy. Okay? This is important. It teaches that history has meaning and purpose. If there is anything that is different about the God of the Bible and him working through the Israelites and on up into Christianity, is that history is going someplace. That's not the way the rest of the world at this time, and even in lots of ways and places today, looks at history. What's the saying? Everything that goes around comes around, okay? Those who do not learn from history are what? Okay, that's a vestige of this view that history's not really going in. It's just the same old stuff over and over and over again. There are lots of folks in our world today that believe that. But the notion that God is working through a people and that he has a plan and that he has put something there and that history is going someplace, it's revolutionary to theology, to the theology of the world. And Exodus is a part of that. The book starts off with God coming in and saying, I haven't forgot the promises I made to Abraham. I'm still going to keep, I'm keeping my word. Now it's time. Okay? Thought about asking you what the major theme of Exodus was. And I really think it's embodied in this. That this is about redemption. Exodus is about redemption. It's about taking the Israelites out of slavery and oppression and beginning the process to turn them into a people. And that God is the one who is the Redeemer. He's the one that is amply able to deal with injustice and oppression. Those are two words we hear a lot today in various contexts. God is the answer to injustice and oppression. He's the Redeemer. Man does not redeem himself. And in that same light, Exodus foreshadows God's continuing and ultimate redemption. We're going to see lots of symbolism and parallels to what happens to the Israelites and our walk, and what God has done for us through Christ, and what he's continuing to do and what he's going to do. And we will see that theme pop up over and over again. One of the impacts of the book of Exodus is it completely restructured and created, in a lot of ways, Israel's calendar, their rituals, their practice. You find all of that stuff, the foundation for all of that stuff, the things that they point back to and the things that they remember are the stuff that's in the book of Exodus. There are more references to the Exodus in the Old Testament, really in the Bible, than there is to any other Old Testament event. Amos chapter 2, this is a common phrase, and you will see similar things to this as many as 120 times in the Old Testament. I brought you up out of Egypt, and I led you 40 years in the desert to give you the land of the Amorites. That's the thing that in the Old Testament, the prophets kept pointing the people back to. I want you to remember what God has done for you. And I want you to remember what he did for you, bringing you out of Egypt. All of the festivals, all of the feasts, all of the sacrifices, all of that stuff has their roots in what God did in Exodus. Really is the pivotal event in the Old Testament. Then lastly, but certainly not least, is God is the Redeemer, but God's redemptive actions demand a proper response. This wasn't, okay, get out of jail free card. You guys go out and have a good time in the promised land. I brought you out here. I'll see you later. Or anytime you want something, you snap your finger and I'm going to be your bellhop and I'll come bring you what you want. God is very clear, and we're going to see this at Sinai when the law is given, is that redemption is a wonderful gift that we don't earn and we can't merit. But our response to that grace is expected. Okay? Again, we will see that as we go throughout Exodus. Okay. Any comments or questions at this point? I didn't know how long this was going to take. We might actually get to text tonight. So, all right. Well, let's go to Exodus. Yes, Matt.
I really like those ideas, and I'm looking forward to hearing more about them. But I was thinking, for the Christian on the other side of the resurrection, should we be remembering more the details of Exodus as those literal events as they happened, or do we kind of think about what they represent as the redemptive work in our own lives?
Yes.
So both.
Yeah. We're going to see that things work on so many levels. Both to the Israelites who are going through this, to looking forward to the promised land, okay, to our coming from an unsaved condition to a saved condition, to our life after we've been saved and the things that we encounter and the life that we live while we're waiting for, ultimately to go be with Him. We're going to see that on a bunch of levels. Yeah.
I guess I was leading with that because there are people today that are Christians and they want to take up those remembrances of feasts and Sabbaths and things like that. And I was wondering what your thoughts were when we try and use both of those sides of the coin.
Well, my initial thought is that's exactly the problem that the first century church had when Gentiles started being converted. I mean, the big issue that they had to get over was we got these people becoming Christians who don't know all of this Jewish stuff, so we got to make them, if they want to hang out with us, we got to make them do it or we won't accept them. I mean, that was, get in the middle of the book of Acts, that's all what they were arguing about. So it's not really new. But I think perhaps the study and the proper understanding of the context and how this is part of an overall plan to start from one man to bring through the law and understanding that you can't be saved by the law and all of the trials and tribulations that the Israelites went through, that we need a Messiah, that we need to be saved. That helps you start put things in the proper place so that you're not looking back because those things were better. In fact, that is perhaps the theme of the book of Hebrews. It's what in the world do you guys want to go back to? Don't you remember how that wasn't it and you needed something else? You got to be crazy to want to go back. And so I think, again, studying Exodus and understanding it in the flow of that helps maybe to prevent some of that wrong application.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the verse that popped into my head from Hebrews is, these were only a picture of the greater reality to come in Christ. Okay. And to me, I look at that, it's brilliant. Seeing how the whole Bible comes together from the pictures of the Old Testament that are pointing to the reality that is in the Spirit and are fulfilled through Jesus.
Certainly there is value in going back and studying about the festivals and the practices and the sacrifices because of the way that they foreshadow the better covenant that is to come. But not to, just let's go back, let's do it because, it was good back then, so it must be good now.
Yeah, which also kind of leads to the point of, and you'll talk about this, I'm sure, how much Exodus in that story points to Jesus, points to the new covenant, helps us better understand the New Testament, but the New Testament so helps us better understand not just what happened in the Exodus, but what God was up to.
Okay.
The New Testament helps us understand the Old Testament almost as much as the Old Testament helps us understand the New Testament.
Agreed.
It makes me think of the scripture that says, I don't remember the number of it, but that those who are trying to be acceptable by the law have fallen from grace. So we don't want to do that. We can learn, but we don't want to live by the law.
That's Galatians, I think you're talking about. And again, Galatians is another book about why are you guys messing around wanting to go back to this stuff that couldn't save you, that just made you frustrated because all it did was reveal to you how much more sinful you were. Why do you want to do that? Okay. Again, roots of it are here pointing forward to the ultimate redemption and to a Messiah. Randy.
I was in a class recently, and the point was made that the children of Israel were coming out of Egypt after 430 years, which is, almost 200 years longer than we have been a country. They didn't know their story. They really were children in terms of knowing anything about God or anything. They had no story, and so a lot of this is relating what their story is, starting from the beginning of time through now. So it's just an interesting perspective.
Okay. They had a story. What was their story?
Being a slave.
We've been a slave. I was a slave. My mama was a slave. Her mama was a slave. 4 generations. Okay, at least 4 generations. That's all they knew. They had never been a people. And they had lived a lifestyle of being told what to do, when to do it, how long to do it, and if you don't do it right, you're going to be punished. That's all they knew. Never governed themselves, had no other than patriarchal lines and knowing whose lineage you came through, they had nothing. No government, no judges, no organization other than through the tribes. And there's maybe 2 million of them, and they're going to come out and they're going to turn into a people. It's mind-boggling. Okay? And we begin to understand maybe why it is that God didn't take them there was a lot shorter route for them to go after the Red Sea into the Promised Land and just be there. And God had the power to do it, but he didn't. Why? And I think it's perhaps wrapped up in some of what we just talked about, is he had to get them ready. He had to train them. It's just like when we become Christians. Well, why isn't it when you're baptized, he doesn't take you up to heaven right away? We got things to learn. We got things to deal with. We got things to grow through. We got things to understand. There's another, there's a parallel, okay? So it's excellent point, Randy, and we will hit that again and again here in the beginning as we see them deal with the things, deal with lack of water, deal with lack of food. I commented to my Monday night group, and I'll probably say it again more than once in here, is we get in Sunday school and we start studying this stuff, and we want to jump all over the Israelites. What are they complaining about? Look at all they saw. Look at all. We don't understand. And we do the very same thing, okay, with perhaps a lot less difficulty and oppression than they put up with. But it makes us feel good to say, oh, well, they complained, and I'm not going to complain because I'm sitting here in church. I'm going to sing the songs, and I'm going to say the right kind of answers. This is really a task to take a people who have nothing, who know nothing except the promises that they're going to be a great people, and be trained and made into a great people. Gary, did you have something?
I was going to actually comment on the very, very last comment you made, that they learned to be obedient. Even though they went through stuff, ultimately they learned to be obedient.
Okay.
And that, yeah.
And some of that learning was, here's what happens when you don't obey. And we know that too, right? we know that from growing up, and we know that even from our spiritual walk as well, that it's like, why did I do that? I should have done what I knew I was supposed to do, or what I studied. All right. Anything else? We will take up chapter 1 next week, 2 weeks from tonight. Let's see if I want to give you any homework. Just read that first chapter, and we'll go through and we will discuss that. We're a couple of minutes early. Let's close with a word of prayer. God, we thank you for a chance to be here tonight and to study your word. We thank you for the plan that you've had since before the beginning of time to be the Redeemer, to redeem us, and to have us in a position where we can come into your presence. We thank you for the blood of your Son and his sacrifice that makes that possible. We pray as we study Exodus that you'll open our eyes to things that we can apply to our walk, but you'll also help us to understand this in the context of your overall plan. We'll see the lessons, and we'll see the applicability of it, see the wisdom and the power that you show through the events that happen here. Thank you for this body. Thank you for having us together, being able to have this fellowship. Please watch over us as we leave here tonight. Give us good rest, and bless our examples and our interactions with others tomorrow, and that we can reflect you in a way that would make you proud. And we pray in Jesus' name. Amen.